Basically, we're operating as a collective since 2021. And if you want a shorthand for what we are a movement school and a co-research platform. So we're trying to do, the practice we're trying to pursue is one of learning and researching to struggle together.
Hoping it will be rich as a space to learn from each other and to think about also what does it mean to, or how can we ally across territories and places in a meaningful way. Also and to also think in this geopolitical moment or in this historical moment where there is like wars and we've just come out of this pandemic in a way and where there is a lot of things that maybe we need to think through across borders.
This is kind of a dream to create a strong group who can do a freedom movement against the regime there. And the Poznan is where I was working in Rezervat, Grupa Animacji Rezervat. So we were working with the kids in the beginning of the war who came from Ukraine, who came to adaptate them in the Polish society because it was very hard for them to not know language.
I'm living in the Apennines, near between Florence and Bologna, and also there's Campi Aperti, that's a really strong organization organizing markets in the city, you know, and association, also associating all the producers in the countryside.
What I'm very excited about is to connect with local groups here. One of the reasons why I'm here.
My dream also, I'm originally from Bogota, and I feel in my a personal experience of migrating and being in Europe, I also feel very much the need of rooting back or finding connections.
I guess that one of the biggest issues we have been facing in the last 20-30 years has been the work in agriculture for migrants, and this is one of the most important things I think this region has been facing.
Very often we just fight on the tiny front. You know, somebody's busy with stopping that specific windmill plant, somebody else has but these things are very connected, right?
And sometimes I think you need to address these big issues, and I kind of hear the tendency to make union formalization, organization, NGOs, extended working class, contained the entire and controlled and physically controlled, by violence controlled environment. And
part of the popular, what we call the popular resistance, the resistance that is not, that does not have access to weapons, but is also complementary to the survival of the
relation with the territory and the rural side and the defense of the. So there is kind of a legitimacy that allows this kind of big civil disobedience thing, and suddenly you see sometimes gray areas like the chalecos amarillos, sometimes, but it's building this
taking care of a small portion of inundation, you know? Become part of the community through an everyday relation of taking care. Maybe there were people working in everyday life. I mean, they're coming in the weekend, taking care of the vineyard and or the olive trees, and try to organize some moment of eating together, collective work together, pruning together, collecting and making the wine together, and try to divide the surplus in terms of having the product, no? For example, if you go there, you have a small pour, almost piece of olive trees, you have your own oil, you have your own wine, you have your own vegetable, so you have something back through the commons. In which way we can apply the idea of the commons to this place? In which way we can open to a community of many different people this place? Okay, this open up a space of participation of 300, 400 people taking care of the place. Try to create forms of democracy from below.
We come from IDRA, we are Instituto de Recerca Urbana de Barcelona, so we are mainly based in urban and organizing in urban housing struggles and replicating Casas del Popolo similar in the cities by creating like normative network architectures and laws like Patrimonio Ciutadà. So we just are trying to escalate this into other places. Last year in Catalonia we had two things. Well, first of all, we used to say that we are more pigs than Catalans, and thus, without counting double militancy, we have 8 million Catalans and more than 8 million pigs. So we are part of this cheap food model. So one thing that we discovered is that we need these infrastructures of the agroecological transition like slaughterhouses. But imagine that this will be publicly owned, managed by a community of neighbors with some kind of economical enterprise that is run as a cooperative, and this creates a commons creating community. Why we do not replicate that into a slaughterhouse?
How the fact that you had to engage with the public institution, of course, for survival reasons and to further the political project, then affected the collaboration or the potential or existing or potential collaboration with the movements that are also very far from agroecology.
I mean, there are still things to do within the institutions, more from like a dispute situation, and also pushing to the institution to move forward and to learn from what we have done from the inside. And also sometimes, I mean, you have to work against, no, or really like from an autonomous perspective.
Within the radical redefinition, ecological, material, climatic, territorial redefinition of the condition of habitability, I think this is an opening. It's the catastrophic side of the opening. But I think we have to stay with it.
Woo! Do you think it's more effective to build narratives around the new populism or around polarization?
Right now, but at the same time, like, okay, as me, because of doing the research, and it's also something that I'm
So Soulèvement, it's a movement, a national movement in France that's organized through different local collectives, be anchored in local struggles around land retaking and fighting infrastructures that are disruptive, and so all with the strategy of disarming those infrastructures and on building new alternatives that are for a desirable future. And now we are trying to think what can we bring on the very local level and how it can be related to these bigger struggles.
Undisciplined Environments is basically a collective of, we can say, activist scholars, so people who either work or have worked in academia, but at the same time who have been involved practically into social movements. There was an occupation at Copenhagen University that lasted a month, and because the university was trying to tire us out of the occupation, but they didn't consider that that space actually became an incredibly fruitful organizing space where we could do this work of conscious building connections between the climate struggle and the anti-genocide struggle.
Common Ecologies is an eco-socialist and anti-imperialist political education organization. We try to basically radicalize youth movements. So how can we develop a political vision that is grounded in the world we live in right now and kind of bears the scars of the world that we live in now, but concretely can show people like these are ways like public transport that could be free. This is like people can really wrap their heads around that, and trying to make knowledge as accessible as possible, but also not vulgarizing or not making kind of not being untrue to the theories or the ideas that you're putting forward. That balance is hard to strike.
I'm part of Disrupt Power, which is researchers around energy mostly. So I feel like this example of like a populist approach to a specific struggle that was at a certain point successful in stopping the Keystone Pipeline is something we could be building on, but it's not, in my opinion, enough in order to build something that is more global or something that is more radical in its demands, because it's very localized. And as you were saying, like, how do we make the local global? And I feel like these questions are very interesting to pose to climate activists, because their struggle is in itself inherently global. And I feel like this anti-imperialism that we always talk about as an abstract concept should be materialized into everyday struggles, and this is something that we lack.
And it's precisely about turning the fossil fuel companies into criminals in the eye of the public. And you do this necessarily through a lot of strategies. So let's not focus on what is different among us, but let's focus on the common enemy we have.
More and more people are experiencing precarity, and this is something that we experience a lot with young people, that both precarity materially and psychological precarity. A lot of people just are not doing well.
And having the commons, which can be something local, but at the same time global territories to defend. What are the territories that we have as in a global scale to defend, but also have like local anchors?
We would like to invite you to share like what are the voice and the challenges that you have been experiencing in your collective. And then, if energies allow, also to think collectively about the dreams, because then in those identified challenges, then we can actually forge and canalize the energy.
So I agree culture for those, I know those some of you know it, some of you don't, but it's a collective that works at the intersection of narratives, knowledge production, and food sovereignty.
Practices of monoculture and seed dependency has completely disconnected the farmer, the indigenous farmer, from the actual knowledge reproduction that has been transferred from generation to generation, and that is rooted in a heirloom seed, for example, seed preservation.
Root and Branch, we're based in Britain and Ireland mostly with our work. So access to land is an obvious barrier to a movement that requires a lot more hands on the land. We need first access to some land that we can work on, and this ties into the question of like the labour question on agroecological farms, because if you want to go into agroecology and you're not fortunate enough to inherit land or money to be able to do so, you have to go and work for others to do it.
So I'm Kathy, I'm based in Bern. The collective that is emerging is a very newborn structure, and so it's been a process of gathering and speaking with a lot of people within the climate justice movement, but also like within Switzerland and outside. The idea of the collective is to build a movement that not only identifies but builds and escalates these eco-social struggles around commons that allow us to not only like reclaim what we want to build, but also like resist the system that is not allowing the new relationships to the land, the new relationships to each other, or the new system that we want to see.
Creating also everyday practices in which the trust can be articulated across subjectivities and across like also personal relationships, and to create also the popular resistance that is also very much needed in Europe. Creating and disseminating communitary seed banks, disseminating more local seeds to build sovereignty from the seeds, which is something that also agrarian culture has emphasized.
When we think about Mondeggi and the possibility for building a sustainable future for farmers who want to live out of this job and want to do it in an agroecological way, I think that we have this question about how it is sustainable on one side economically, on the other side in terms of work.
many of us, like myself, for example, have peasant grandparents still. Like Europe, the industrialization of agriculture went incredibly fast, and there's a kind of practical knowledge, but also a social and community memory that has been erased. One thing that relates a little bit to the border olive projects and so on, I think, is also the question of creating refuges somehow, and creating corridors a little bit. I think that, I mean, this is where, both in the urban and in rural spaces, in this moment of kind of multiple crises, I think the need to create spaces for other kinds of species, for people on the move to go through, for other kinds of autonomy in social reproduction.
So that it feels like there's this impossibility within the political economic system of capitalism of being able to achieve agroecology as a transition.
Giorni che sono in vagone, oggi fate una giornata del genere. Certo.